Hey y'all, just hopping into the next section, human sex hormones. So a big portion of this unit is understanding what hormones contribute to our secondary sexual characteristics, depicting if we are a male or a female biologically. Now, when we talk about secondary sexual characteristics, all of these are going to start occurring around the time of what we call puberty, as a child becomes an adolescent. And all of this is dictated by the hormones estrogen in girls and testosterone in boys. So for the female, and if you'll notice, because of a British spelling, there's an O in front of estrogen, but in America, we just start with E. So just note that's a strange little caveat difference. For our female secondary sexual characteristics, estrogen is going to affect our breast development. It's going to contribute to hair growth around our body. Your menstrual cycle will begin, and hips become wider. Okay, so for males, this is dictated, their secondary sexual characteristics is dictated by testosterone. This allows the growth of the penis and testicles, growth of facial hair and body hair, muscles begin to develop, voice breaks, and the testes start to produce sperm. Now, emotional changes do occur as these hormones are increased. So this is why some of you may be also experiencing lots of different mood swings as these hormones are released into your body for the first time. And then, of course, as these hormones are released into your bloodstream, not only are you at risk of increased mood swings, but this is where individuals become more interested in sex. So this is important to note because we don't need to hide from the fact that most all of you are producing these hormones, and we just need to be aware of what that means for your bodies. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Specifically, this next topic, which is what your textbook hones in on in great detail, and honestly, it's challenging material. It's the female menstrual cycle. And yes, all of you have to learn about it because it can be asked of you on test questions. But for the menstrual cycle, this is going to start in early adolescent girls, somewhere around the age of 12. For some people, it's sooner. For some people, it's later. Again, controlled by the release of those hormones. The average menstrual cycle is 28 days long, and we're going to look and see what that means and what's going on in those average 28 days. Ovulation is a term that we will have in your notes and is very important for you to understand what that is because it is the release of an egg in a female's from a female's ovary into the oviduct about halfway through the cycle, around day 14 of the cycle. It then travels down the oviduct, hoping to be fertilized by male sperm, and then eventually into the uterus. Now, every single menstrual cycle, ladies, I need you to understand that your body is preparing for a baby. That is your body's goal, to get a baby in there. That's just how we are naturally created and designed. Now, failure to fertilize that egg will then lead to menstruation. This is commonly referred to as a female's period. Now, the period is caused by the breakdown of the thickening of the lining of that uterus because if you were to get pregnant, that lining would stay intact, eventually form the placenta, and like we talked about in the last video, be the home and house for the fetus, for the baby. But if there is no fertilization, it has to be removed. You have to get rid of it, and we start the process all over again, and then your body starts the cycle all over again, trying to get you pregnant. That's just how your body's naturally designed and orchestrated. Now, menstruation lasts around 5 to 7 days, and it signals the beginning of the next cycle. So day 1 of your actual cycle is day 1 of menstruation. So important to know that. There's several test questions on that. When we look at this, you can see like a chart view, and I'll provide this in your notes because there are several test questions that we have in our test bank that look at the uterus lining from day 1 to about day 28 and what is going on with that, and just understanding the differences of the change in lining. So each cycle, the lining is being built up, trying to prepare for a baby, and then subsequently being removed and broken down if no baby is there through fertilization. Okay, important to note that the menstrual cycle is controlled by the release of hormones from your ovary and your pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is in our brain. Of course, ovaries, part of our female reproductive system. Now, for the fun part, FSH and LH. What these stand for: FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. These are the two key players at work here in terms of hormones, besides estrogen and progesterone, of course, that are working to either prepare that uterus for a baby or have it go ahead and move on, start the cycle over, okay? So FSH stimulates egg maturation in the follicles of the ovary and stimulates follicles in the ovaries to secrete estrogen. LH, that luteinizing hormone, at its peak stimulates ovulation, so the release of the egg into the oviduct, and then results in the formation of the corpus luteum, which we'll talk about. Okay, so this is the image I wanted to get to. We also need to talk about the roles of estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen stimulates the uterus to develop a lining to replace the lining lost during menstruation. And then post-ovulation, it inhibits FSH and LH production in the pituitary gland. So you can see the different surges of estrogen and progesterone at different times. These are important to note. So estrogen surges right before ovulation, and then after ovulation, there's a progesterone surge. Slight estrogen surge, but progesterone is the one that takes over. Okay, so progesterone is going to maintain and thicken that lining of the uterus. It inhibits FSH and LH production, because remember, those are the ones stimulating the next follicles to be released. And if fertilization doesn't occur, it will drop off, so menstruation can occur. So then that next cycle can kick into gear, okay? Again, these graphs and notes will be provided for you to read over and help you understand, okay? Estrogen levels rise from day 1 and peak just before day 14, that day of ovulation. It helps causes the uterine walls to thicken and that egg to mature. And it's going to peak just before that egg is released. Progesterone stays low, but it's going to rise after ovulation has occurred. And it increases the levels, causing that uterine lining to continue to thicken further. Because again, we're trying to get ready for a baby ultimately. And then if there is no fertilization, everything will drop off. Menstruation or the period will then occur. Okay. All right. Important kind of little picture here that I'll provide for you again in a diagram, just to help you kind of understand the balance between the FSH, the LH, and the estrogen and progesterone. Your pituitary gland is going to produce that FSH and LH in its pituitary gland. And then estrogen and progesterone are produced from the ovaries, and they inhibit the production of FSH and LH. It's hard to keep all these letters straight. So there's a balance that they work with. So remember, hormones, like we talked about in our hormone unit, they're released slowly over time, and it's really like a slow balancing act. So FSH and LH are dictated by that estrogen and progesterone and the balance of keeping one another in harmony, so to speak. And if you can imagine, this delicate balance can be sometimes not perfect, and that's where we have issues with our bodies that sometimes we have to seek medical care. Looking at your ovary, estrogen and progesterone are produced there. The FSH is going to affect the ovary by stimulating egg maturation, and then the LH stimulates ovulation. So follicle stimulating hormone helps with the egg maturity, but your luteinizing hormone, that just helps with you ovulating, the actual release of the egg, okay? And then, of course, our uterus, estrogen and progesterone affect our uterus by stimulating the development and maintenance of that lining. So everything in your uterus that's trying to get ready to house the baby is dictated by the estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so these notes will be provided for you. Make sure you take your diagram that will be printed out. Move on to your CFU and Ed Puzzle in your daily activity. Good job. We made it through an interesting section.